The house on Sycamore Lane looked like something pulled straight out of a postcard, with its white picket fence, neatly trimmed hedges, and flower beds bursting with late summer blooms. The kind of house that promised safety, comfort, and an easy life in the suburbs. And for the Thompson family, Mark, his wife Rachel, their 12-year-old daughter Emily, and 8-year-old son Jake, it felt like the beginning of a new chapter, one that would finally put years of financial struggle and cramped apartment living behind them. So as the moving truck pulled away and the sun dipped low behind the maple trees lining the street, they stood in their new driveway breathing in the crisp evening air, waving politely to neighbors who smiled too politely, who lingered just a second too long before slipping back behind their perfectly polished doors. And Mark couldn't help but notice how every lawn looked identically perfect. The grass cut at the exact same height, the same kind of mailbox perched at the edge of each driveway, like the whole street had been pressed from a mold. And yet he brushed the thought aside because Rachel looked so happy. Her eyes lit up as she carried a box marked kitchen through the front door. And Emily was already filming with her phone, capturing every corner for her social media, while Jake darted upstairs shouting, "This one's my room," as if the house had been waiting just for him. And yet beneath all the cheer there was a strange stillness in the air, the kind that makes your ears ring, the kind that tells you a place is holding its breath. And when the last box was carried inside and Rachel began unpacking plates, and Mark fiddled with the thermostat, and the kids argued over who got the bigger closet, night fell quicker than they expected, the neighborhood growing so dark and quiet that even the crickets seemed reluctant to chirp. And when Emily pulled open her curtains to admire the street, she whispered, "It's weird, Dad. Nobody's outside, not even walking their dogs," and Mark laughed it off with, "It's a school night, kiddo. People are just tucked in early." Though he himself thought it strange that every porch light was on, every single one, glowing in identical yellow halos like watchful eyes staring across the pavement. And when the family finally settled into bed, exhausted from the move, Rachel kissed Mark goodnight and whispered, "This place feels different, doesn't it?" And he murmured reassurance he didn't quite believe, because as he drifted toward sleep, the silence pressed down heavier than he had ever known in the city. No car horns, no distant chatter. Not even the hum of traffic, just the occasional groan of the old house settling and the soft hiss of the air conditioner, until suddenly at exactly 3 a.m, the sharp chime of the doorbell shattered the silence, jolting Mark awake in an instant, his heart hammering as Rachel stirred beside him asking, who on earth would be here now? And he swung his legs over the side of the bed, padding softly down the carpeted stairs with every nerve in his body prickling. And as he reached the front door he hesitated, the glow of the porch light spilling through the glass panel, the bell having rung once, perfectly crisp, but now replaced by silence so complete it made his ears ache. And with his hand on the cold brass knob he glanced through the peephole, seeing nothing but the neatly kept lawn, the empty street bathed in yellow porch light glow. No figure standing there, no car, not even a breeze stirring the hedges, just emptiness. And for a long moment he held his breath, waiting, listening, but nothing moved, nothing stirred. And when he finally cracked open the door just an inch, the night air felt colder than it should, and he stepped out barefoot onto the porch, scanning left and right, his heart thundering because everything looked normal yet felt completely wrong. And the moment he shut the door again and leaned against it, Rachel whispered from the staircase, her hair tousled, her eyes wide, "Was someone there?" And Mark shook his head slowly, forcing a smile. Just some kids messing around, probably. Though deep down he knew no kids would be out at 3 a.m. in a neighborhood this quiet, and when they crept back to bed, neither of them truly slept, their ears straining for another sound, another ring. But the house remained oppressively still, as if it too were waiting for something. The next morning came quietly, the kind of calm dawn where the sunlight seemed too soft, too deliberate as it spilled over the identical rooftops of Sycamore Lane, and Rachel stood at the kitchen window sipping her coffee, staring out at the street that looked so pristine it almost felt artificial, every mailbox aligned perfectly, every trash bin pulled neatly to the curb, and yet not a single soul moved outside. No joggers, no kids on bikes, no cars pulling out of driveways like you'd expect in a suburban neighborhood. And when Mark came down rubbing the sleep from his eyes, she said softly, "It's strange, isn't it? Almost like everyone disappears at night and doesn't come out until the sun's high in the sky." He brushed it off with a weak smile. "You're just tired, Rach. New house, new nerves. It's natural." Though even he couldn't shake the image of that empty porch at 3 a.m., the bell's echo still ringing in his ears, So he distracted himself with unpacking boxes and fixing little things around the house, while the kids explored their rooms, Emily documenting every corner for her followers online, her captions full of excitement, though she admitted in one video, "It's almost too perfect here," like one of those neighborhoods in scary movies, and Jake busied himself in the backyard, tossing a ball against the fence until he froze, staring at the row of houses behind theirs, because he swore he saw a curtain twitch, a pale face retreating, and when he shouted for his sister to look, the window was already empty, the curtain still. Later that afternoon, their neighbors introduced themselves in the way only suburban neighbors do. Overly friendly, yet oddly reserved, with practiced smiles that didn't quite reach their eyes, a man in a perfectly pressed polo shirt offering a plate of cookies while his wife stood stiffly behind him, their voices warm but their gazes constantly shifting, as if measuring the Thompsons in some unspoken way. And when Rachel thanked them and tried to start a casual conversation, the woman's only response was, "We're glad you're here. Just remember the rules," before she smiled again and changed the subject to weather. And Rachel felt a chill run down her spine, though she laughed it off later, telling Mark, maybe she meant the HOA rules. You know how strict these places can be. But still, the way the words lingered bothered her. That night, as the kids settled into their rooms, Emily whispered through the crack in her door, "Dad, is it safe here?" "It doesn't feel like our old place." And he kissed her forehead, insisting, "It's the safest place in the world, kiddo. Trust me." Though his own nerves twisted when the clock on his nightstand ticked past midnight, every second louder than it should have been, the house groaning and settling like it was alive, and outside the stillness grew heavier, until once again, as though timed with cruel precision, the doorbell rang sharp and clear at exactly 3 a.m., jolting them both upright in bed, Rachel clutching his arm, whispering, "Don't go this time, Mark. Please don't," but he couldn't resist. Something in the sound demanded attention, like a command more than a question. So he crept downstairs again, each step groaning under his weight, his pulse hammering, and when he reached the front door, he didn't open it this time, just pressed his eye to the peephole, and his breath caught because, unlike the night before, he saw something at the edge of the porch light. Just beyond the glow, a figure stood motionless, tall and thin, its head tilted slightly as if listening, its body almost blending with the shadows, and though Mark strained his eyes, he couldn't make out a face, couldn't tell if it was even human. Only that it was there, waiting, and when he blinked, it was gone, the porch empty again, the street silent, and when he finally stumbled back upstairs and crawled into bed beside Rachel, he didn't tell her what he saw because saying it out loud would make it too real, and yet he knew in his bones they weren't alone on Sycamore Lane. The days following the move blurred together in a strange rhythm, the kind of rhythm that felt rehearsed rather than natural, because every morning when the Thompsons stepped outside, the neighbors were already awake, already standing in their driveways or adjusting their sprinklers or clipping their roses, each of them with those same polite smiles plastered across their faces as though they had been waiting, rehearsing, preparing for the family's arrival. And Rachel, ever the optimist, waved cheerfully back, though she whispered later to Mark, "It's like they don't blink," because every glance lingered too long, every gesture seemed to beat off from what it should have been. And the more they settled in, the more the strange details piled up, curtains twitching whenever Rachel opened a window, figures turning away quickly when Emily rode her bike down the street, conversations that ceased the moment Mark walked past on his way to the mailbox. On the third evening, as the sun bled orange across the horizon, Emily noticed something that made her skin prickle. The kids across the street, a boy and a girl she guessed were maybe 9 or 10, were playing on the lawn in the exact same way they had on the first day, tossing a red rubber ball between them with identical movements, wearing the exact same clothes, their faces unchanged, as if they hadn't aged a second, hadn't moved on from the moment the Thompsons first saw them. She told her mother, but Rachel only smiled nervously and said, maybe they just really like that game. Though later, when Rachel peeked out of her own window, she saw the children still there, tossing the ball, staring at nothing in particular, their mouths moving silently as if whispering to someone she couldn't see, and when one of them suddenly looked up, locking eyes with her from across the street, she gasped and yanked the curtain shut, her heart thundering. That night Rachel confided in Mark, "There's something wrong with this street. I can feel it," but Mark tried to soothe her worries, though even he had begun to notice the whispers, low, hushed voices that seemed to follow him when he walked past clusters of neighbors, the way they bent their heads together, speaking too quietly to hear, but always pausing when he got close, replacing their words with forced smiles and nods. The strangest encounter came a week later, when Rachel decided to bake cookies and take them to the woman who lived alone in the house 2 doors down. An elderly lady with stark white hair and eyes that seemed too sharp for her frail frame. When Rachel knocked, the old woman opened the door slowly, peering out as though afraid of being overheard, and instead of a greeting, she hissed in a voice that rattled Rachel's bones. "Don't answer the doorbell at night," then slammed the door shut so quickly the cookies nearly tumbled from Rachel's hands, leaving her rooted to the porch, shivering though the afternoon sun was still warm. She told Mark later, but he dismissed it nervously, saying, "She's probably senile, Rach. Old people say strange things sometimes." Though deep down he couldn't stop thinking about those words, because every night like clockwork the bell rang at 3, a single sharp note that left his heart pounding in his throat, and though he resisted looking some nights, the memory of that tall shadow on the lawn haunted him, making his hands sweat and his chest tighten, because he absolutely knew, the old woman's warning wasn't madness. It was truth wrapped in terror. Over the next few days, the Thompsons tried to fall into a normal routine, but Sycamore Lane refused to feel normal. Every morning when Mark stepped outside to fetch the newspaper, he noticed the same neighbor across the street, Mr. Peterson, standing perfectly still at the edge of his driveway, watering his lawn with a bright green hose that never seemed to move, his eyes following Mark's every step until he went back inside. When Rachel jogged down the street in the afternoon, hoping to meet someone more friendly, she caught sight of people watching from behind curtains, their outlines blurred but unmistakably human, vanishing the second she looked directly their way. As if the act of being seen was forbidden, Emily became convinced that the children on the corner house were not only playing the same game every day, but that they were repeating the same gestures in a loop. She swore she saw the boy toss the ball at the exact same angle, the girl laugh with the same pitch, and the ball bounce in the same rhythm, as if the scene had been recorded and was simply playing over and over again. When she tried to film them, her phone glitched, the screen filling with static before shutting off completely, leaving her shaken. Jake, ever curious, made the mistake of waving to those children one morning. The boy froze mid-toss, ball in hand, and the girl turned her head toward him slowly, smiling a smile that was too wide for her small face, and then, just as suddenly, they both resumed their game as though nothing had happened, leaving Jake pale and speechless. That evening, Rachel tried to talk to one of the neighbor women who was clipping roses in her front yard. "It's such a beautiful neighborhood," Rachel began, "but I never seem to see anyone out past sundown." "Is it just me?" The woman paused, her pruning shears trembling slightly in her gloved hand, then said flatly, "We like to keep to ourselves," before turning back to her roses, clipping them with sharp mechanical precision, until Rachel took the hint and left. The warning from the old woman down the street gnawed at Rachel's mind. She started noticing how quickly people shut their blinds when she walked past, how conversations stopped mid-sentence, how every smile from the neighbors seemed like a mask stretched over something darker. One afternoon she couldn't resist knocking on the old woman's door again. This time the woman opened only a crack, her face pale and her eyes darting nervously. "I told you once," she whispered, "don't answer the doorbell at night. If you value your children, lock every door and pretend you don't hear it." When Rachel asked why, the old woman's expression twisted with fear. "Because once you open it, they know you're theirs." And before Rachel could ask who they were, the door slammed shut again, louder this time, and the sound echoed in her chest like a final warning. That night, Rachel told Mark, but he shook his head, trying to sound rational. "She's just paranoid. Maybe she's sick. We can't let her scare us." But when the doorbell rang at exactly 3 again, sharp and mocking, Rachel clutched his arm and whispered, "She's not paranoid. She knows." And in the suffocating silence that followed, Mark couldn't bring himself to disagree. By the 4th night, the tension inside the house felt like another presence pressing against the walls, making every creak of the floorboards sound like footsteps, every draft like a whisper. Emily had stopped posting videos of the neighborhood. Her phone had glitched too many times, and once when she played back a clip of herself standing in the driveway, she noticed something in the reflection of the car window behind her. A tall figure, faceless, standing in the middle of the street, though she swore no one had been there when she recorded it. She deleted the video immediately but couldn't shake the memory. Jake had begun waking from nightmares, always at the same time, always trembling, muttering, "The bell. Don't open the door," even though no one had told him about the old woman's warning. Rachel, more on edge with each passing day, started to notice things inside the house too. Subtle changes she couldn't explain, like the curtains in the living room being slightly open when she was sure she'd closed them, the faint sound of murmuring when she stood at the top of the stairs late at night, words she couldn't quite make out but that seemed to be coming from the walls themselves. And then there were the neighbors. The smiles had grown thinner, their stares longer, as if testing the family's patience. On Saturday morning, Rachel caught sight of a group standing together near the end of the street. 4 adults, shoulders pressed close, whispering in low voices. She led the kids back inside quickly, but later, when she peeked again, the group hadn't moved at all. Still huddled, still whispering, like a broken record repeating the same frame. Mark, desperate for some normalcy, decided to mow the lawn that afternoon. As he pushed the mower across the grass, he felt eyes on him. And when he looked up, nearly every neighbor was at their window, their faces shadowed by curtains, watching in silence. He waved once awkwardly, but no one responded. Instead, as he made another pass across the yard, he heard something. A hissed phrase carried on the breeze, though he couldn't tell who it came from. It sounded like 3 o'clock and then nothing more. That night, they tried to distract themselves with a movie in the living room, but none of them could focus. When the clock neared 3, Mark muted the TV, the silence in the house unbearable. Right on time, the bell rang. One sharp, hollow note that seemed to echo longer than it should have. Jake whimpered and buried his face against Rachel. Emily whispered, "Don't answer it, Dad." Mark stayed rooted to the couch, every muscle taut. The bell didn't ring again, but a sound followed, a faint scraping across the porch, slow and deliberate, like something dragging its fingers along the wood. They sat frozen until the sound stopped, and only then did Rachel dare to breathe. Upstairs, as she tucked the children into bed, Emily asked in a trembling voice, "Do the neighbors hear it too?" Rachel forced a smile, smoothing her daughter's hair. "Of course they do," she whispered, though her voice wavered. "They just don't want to talk about it." By the time the first full week in the house had passed, the Thompsons no longer doubted that something was happening on Sycamore Lane, something no one wanted to speak of, something carefully hidden behind polite smiles and silent stares. Because the doorbell didn't just ring at 3 anymore, it commanded the night. Its chime sharper, heavier, almost vibrating through the walls, each note sinking into their bones until sleep became impossible. Mark, exhausted from pacing the hallway every night, finally decided he needed proof, something tangible to show Rachel, to show himself, maybe even to shove in the faces of those neighbors who looked at them with their glassy, too long stares. He bought a camera, a simple security system with night vision, and spent an afternoon installing it on the porch, angling it toward the front yard and gate. "Now we'll see what kind of prankster thinks this is funny," he muttered, though his hands trembled as he tightened the last screw, because deep down he wasn't sure he wanted to know. That night the family tried to carry on as if it were normal, but every tick of the clock was louder than the last, and by the time the hands crept toward 3, Rachel was clutching the blanket so tight her knuckles were white. Emily sat rigid on her bed with her phone clutched uselessly in her hand, and Jake had buried himself under the covers, whispering, "Don't answer, don't answer, don't answer," like a prayer. Then it came, the bell, loud and piercing, sharper than it had ever been, echoing through the house as though someone had pressed their face right against the chime and breathed the sound inside. Mark didn't move, not at first, but the bell rang again and then again, each note harder, more insistent, until finally, with Rachel's wide eyes following him, he forced himself downstairs, his body trembling. He didn't open the door. Instead, he sat in the glow of the security monitor, his breath loud in his ears, and when the live feed appeared, his heart stopped. There, standing just beyond the porch light at the gate, was a figure, tall, impossibly tall. Its shoulders hunched, its head tilted slightly to the side as though studying the house. The shadows clung to it, swallowing details, but Mark could make out the suggestion of arms hanging too long, legs planted firmly, and though it did not move, he knew it was staring, fixed entirely on the house, on them. He stared at the screen, waiting for it to shift, to step forward. But it didn't, it simply stood, silent, watching until the feed flickered, static cutting across the image for half a second, and when the picture cleared, the figure was gone. Mark's chest heaved, his throat dry. and when he replayed the footage seconds later, the recording showed nothing. Just the empty yard, the still gate, as though the figure had never been there. "Upstairs," Rachel whispered, "and did you see anything?" And Mark lied, shaking his head. Just an empty street, because saying otherwise would make it real, would drag it into their lives even more. But in the reflection of the darkened screen, he thought he saw movement behind him, the faintest ripple in the shadows of the hallway, and he knew the bell wasn't just calling from outside. It was already inside, waiting. The following day, Mark barely spoke during breakfast, his eyes shadowed by sleeplessness, his hands trembling each time he reached for his coffee. Rachel studied him closely, sensing he was hiding something, but she didn't press, afraid that naming it would only give it more power. Emily, however, wasn't so cautious. "Dad," she said suddenly, her spoon clinking against her bowl, "you saw something last night, didn't you?" Mark froze, the words striking him like a slap. But before he could reply, Jake muttered quietly, "The tall man at the gate," his voice trembling, his eyes fixed on the table. Rachel's stomach knotted. "Jake, what do you mean?" she asked gently. But the boy only shook his head and shoved another spoonful of cereal into his mouth, refusing to look up again. Mark forced a laugh, though it came out hollow. "Kids in their dreams," he said. But the way Emily's sharp eyes bore into him told him she didn't believe a word. He spent the rest of the day replaying the footage, hoping desperately that maybe he had imagined it, that his tired brain had conjured a shadow where none existed. But each time he scrolled through the files, there were gaps, seconds missing, moments cut out, leaving only fragments of the night as though something had deliberately erased itself from the memory card. By evening, Mark's nerves were raw. He told Rachel they should leave just for a few days, maybe a hotel until they figured out what was happening. But when she searched for nearby vacancies online, every single hotel showed fully booked. No explanation, no availability, as if the entire town was sealed. That night the family huddled together in the living room, determined not to separate. But as the clock neared 3, a suffocating dread filled the air, thick and heavy, making the air hard to breathe. And then it came, the bell. But this time it wasn't one ring. It rang again and again, each chime louder, more furious, vibrating through the floor, rattling the picture frames on the wall until Rachel covered her ears and Jake screamed, "Make it stop." Mark, desperate, turned to the monitor. The figure was there again. Closer this time, standing just at the edge of the driveway, its head still tilted, its frame too tall, too distorted to be human. For the first time, Mark saw its hands, long, narrow fingers that seemed to curl and twitch as if eager to reach forward. He wanted to tear his eyes away, but he couldn't. The thing didn't move toward the house. Not yet, but the bell kept shrieking, as though the sound itself were trying to break the Thompsons down, to force them into opening the door. Rachel grabbed his arm, tears in her eyes. "Mark, don't, no matter what, don't open it." He nodded, but his gaze remained glued to the screen. Then, as suddenly as it began, the bell fell silent. The figure was gone. The yard was empty. The monitor flickered, and for a split second the feed showed not the front porch, but the inside of the living room, their own faces pale and wide-eyed as they stared at the screen. Then it blinked back to normal. Mark shut the monitor off, his hands shaking violently. Upstairs, as the family tried to sleep, Rachel whispered in the dark, "It's getting closer." And Mark, staring at the ceiling with his heart pounding, knew she was right. The morning after the worst night yet, Rachel decided she couldn't take it anymore. The silence of the neighbors, the unanswered questions, the suffocating weight of not knowing why the doorbell rang at exactly 3 o'clock. She told Mark they needed answers, and for once he didn't argue. So while the kids stayed inside with strict instructions not to open the door for anyone, they drove to the small brick building that passed as the town library. It smelled of dust and mildew, the air stale as though no one had opened a window in decades. Behind the desk sat a librarian with watery eyes and a smile that looked more like a grimace, who perked up the moment Rachel asked for information about their street. "Sycamore Lane," the woman repeated, her voice a little too loud, echoing in the quiet room. "What about it?" Rachel exchanged a glance with Mark before answering. "Our house. Number 17. We just moved in." The librarian's face drained of color. "Number 17 hasn't had a family in—" She trailed off, catching herself, then forced a tight smile. "I'll see what I can find." She disappeared into the archives, leaving them standing awkwardly in the silent library. When she returned, she carried a thin, yellowing folder, her fingers trembling as she set it down. This is all that remains. Records disappear sometimes. She didn't wait for thanks, just walked away quickly as though afraid of being seen with them. Mark opened the folder. Inside were brittle newspaper clippings, typewritten notes, and a black and white photo of their house. Only it looked older, bleaker. The white paint faded and peeling, the windows dark like empty eyes. The first clipping was from 1963. Local man missing after answering doorbell at 3 a.m. Police baffled. Family refuses to comment. The next article, dated 1974, mentioned a young couple who moved into number 17 and vanished within 6 months. Their belongings remained inside, but no trace of them was ever found. Another article from 1989 spoke of a family of 4 who had disappeared on Christmas Eve. Their dinner still laid out on the table, gifts unopened. The only clue, a neighbor reporting the doorbell ringing over and over that night. Rachel's hands trembled as she flipped through the files. Every decade, another family, another disappearance. And always the same detail, neighbors reporting the doorbell. Always at 3 o'clock. It's been happening for decades, Mark whispered, his voice hoarse. And no one's ever stopped it. At the bottom of the folder was a handwritten note scrawled in shaky cursive. Don't answer the bell. Don't look at the figure. Pretend you don't hear it. Once you see him, he sees you too. Rachel felt a chill crawl up her spine. They knew, she whispered. The neighbors. They all knew. Mark closed the folder with shaking hands. That's why they stare. That's why they whisper. They're just waiting for us to... He couldn't finish the sentence. They left the library in silence, the folder clutched tightly under Rachel's arm. As they drove back down Sycamore Lane, every curtain twitched, every neighbor's head turned. And for the first time, Rachel realized it wasn't hostility in their eyes. It was pity. When they returned home, Rachel spread the folder across the kitchen table, each brittle clipping weighed down with coffee mugs so the edges wouldn't curl. Emily leaned over them, her sharp young eyes devouring every line. Jake sat farther away, knees tucked to his chest, his face pale as milk. So it's true, Emily whispered, her voice shaking more with excitement than fear. This house is cursed. Mark wanted to tell her not to say the word, that giving it shape might make it stronger, but he couldn't bring himself to speak. Instead, he just stared at the black and white photograph of the house, the same house they lived in now, only captured decades earlier, with a darkness in its windows that mirrored the hollow feeling in his chest. Rachel traced the handwritten note with her finger. Don't answer the bell. Don't look at the figure. Pretend you don't hear it, she repeated softly like a prayer. Emily frowned. But you looked at it. On the monitor. Mark closed his eyes. The memory of that twisted figure at the gate still lingered, burned into his eyelids. I didn't mean to, he whispered. Rachel touched his hand, her grip firm. We can still stop this. We just have to be careful. But Jake finally spoke up, his voice so soft they almost missed it. What about the neighbors? Why don't they do anything? His question hung in the air like smoke. Rachel didn't answer right away because the truth was too heavy. The neighbors had chosen silence. Whether out of fear or complicity, she couldn't tell. Later that night, when the children were asleep, Mark stood at the window, peering across the street. He saw a curtain shift in the house opposite theirs, revealing the pale oval of a face. It was the old woman who had first warned Rachel not to answer the doorbell. Her gaze lingered on him, long and sorrowful, before she drew the curtain shut again. Something about her expression told him she knew far more than she had let on. The next morning, Rachel made up her mind. I need to talk to her, she said, determination hardening her voice. The old woman. She knows. Mark argued, told her it was too dangerous, but Rachel was already out the door, marching across the street. The old woman answered before Rachel even knocked, as though she had been waiting. Her house smelled of lavender and mothballs, filled with yellowed lace curtains and shelves of cracked porcelain dolls that seemed to watch from every angle. She invited Rachel in without a word. Finally, over tea that neither of them touched, the woman spoke. The house doesn't want you. It never wants anyone. It calls them and they come, and then it takes them. Her voice was rough, broken by age and fear. Rachel asked why no one stopped it, why no one warned them before they moved in, and the woman's eyes filled with tears. We can't. Once you know, once you hear the bell, you belong to it too. We don't answer because if we do, it will come for us. It only needs one house at a time. Rachel's hands shook as she set her cup down. How long has it been happening? She asked, though she already knew the answer was longer than she could stomach. The woman sighed. Since before I was born. My mother told me stories from when she was a girl. Always at number 17. Always at 3 in the morning. Rachel leaned forward. What happens if you do answer? The woman closed her eyes, and when she opened them again, they shone with terror. No one ever comes back. Rachel walked back across the street in a daze, the old woman's words clinging to her skin like a cold mist. Mark was waiting on the porch, his face pale. Well? He asked, but the look in her eyes was enough of an answer. He didn't push further. That evening, while the kids pretended to do homework at the dining table, Rachel spread the folder open again, her mind replaying the old woman's voice. It only needs one house at a time. The idea burrowed into her brain. Did that mean their suffering bought safety for the rest of the neighborhood? Were the neighbors complicit because they knew that as long as the bell was ringing at number 17, it wouldn't come for them? Mark seemed to be thinking the same thing because he muttered, "That's why they're all watching us. They don't want us to survive. If we do, maybe it moves on." His bitterness was a new edge in his voice, sharp and dangerous. Emily slammed her pencil down, glaring at both of them. "You're talking like we're already dead. Why can't we just leave?" Rachel wanted to tell her that she had already checked. Their car wouldn't start that morning, the battery drained, though it was brand new. She had tried to call a tow truck, but the line crackled with static before cutting out entirely. Mark had gone to ask about a bus schedule at the convenience store, but the clerk had just stared at him blankly before shaking his head. "No buses run anymore," he'd said flatly as though rehearsed. Rachel couldn't bring herself to crush Emily's hope, so she stayed silent. But Emily wasn't stupid. She could see the truth in her parents' eyes. That night, the bell didn't just ring, it roared. Each chime slammed through the walls, rattling glasses off the shelves. Jake curled up in Rachel's lap, sobbing, while Emily pressed her hands to her ears, her eyes wide with a fury that looked too old for her young face. Mark paced, muttering curses under his breath, finally shouting at the walls, "What do you want from us?" The bell stopped instantly. The silence that followed was worse than the noise. They all froze, waiting. Then slowly, the sound of scratching began, long nails dragging across the wood of the front door. Rachel clutched Jake tighter, her heart beat a hammer in her chest. Emily whispered, "Don't answer it." Mark stood rigid, staring at the door as though hypnotized. His hand twitched at his side, aching to turn the knob. Rachel hissed his name, pulling him back to himself. The scratching stopped. When Mark dared to look at the monitor, the figure was closer than ever, its head almost touching the porch light, its body so tall it seemed bent to fit into the frame. This time its face was visible, or at least the suggestion of one. Hollow pits where eyes should be, a mouth stretched into something that wasn't quite a smile. And then for the first time it moved. One hand lifted, impossibly long fingers uncurling and pressed against the camera. The screen went black. Mark stumbled backward, his skin clammy, his breath shallow. Rachel whispered the old woman's warning again. No one ever comes back. The storm rolled in just before midnight, thick black clouds swallowing the moon. Wind howling through the trees along Sycamore Lane until their branches clawed at the sky like desperate fingers. Rain lashed against the windows in violent sheets, lightning splitting the night in blinding flashes that made the shadows inside the house seem alive, writhing across the walls with every strike. The Thompsons sat huddled together in the living room, every lamp blazing though the electricity flickered with each roar of thunder. Their nerves wound so tightly that every creak of the old house sent shivers down their spines. For days they had endured the nightly toll of the bell, but tonight felt different, charged, almost purposeful, as though something had been building toward this moment. Rachel clutched Jake to her chest, his small body trembling against her, while Emily sat rigid beside her, her jaw set, eyes fixed on the front door as though sheer defiance could hold it closed. Mark stood at the window staring out into the storm, his face gaunt, haunted, lit intermittently by the flashes of lightning. He hadn't slept in days, his eyes bloodshot, his voice hoarse from arguments whispered in the dark hours of the night when the bell fell silent. He had stopped pretending he didn't see the figure anymore. They all saw it. They all knew it was waiting. When the clock struck 3, the first chime rattled the house like a hammer striking glass. It didn't stop this time. The bell shrieked again and again and again, relentless, overlapping itself until it became a single screaming wail that seemed to come not from the porch, but from inside the walls themselves, vibrating through the floorboards. pressing against their skulls until Rachel cried out in pain, and Jake buried his face against her shoulder, sobbing. Emily shouted over the noise, her voice raw. "Don't open it! Whatever happens, don't open it." But Mark was already moving. His face was blank, his eyes distant, as if the sound had hollowed him out and left only a shell behind. He staggered toward the door, every step jerky and unsteady like a puppet pulled by invisible strings. Rachel screamed his name, leaping to her feet. But the moment she reached for him, a blinding flash of lightning cut the room apart, followed instantly by a crack of thunder so loud it shook dust from the ceiling. The lights flickered, died, and the house was plunged into darkness save for the blue glow of the storm outside. The bell did not stop. It rang louder, faster, until it was no longer a series of chimes but one endless, deafening scream that tore through the walls, through their bodies, through their sanity. Mark reached the door. His hand rose to the knob. Rachel lunged, but the force of the storm seemed to press her back, invisible hands holding her away as though the house itself had chosen sides. Emily screamed, her voice breaking, "Dad, don't!" But Mark turned the knob and opened the door. The moment the door swung open, the sound cut off. The bell's endless scream collapsed into silence so complete it felt like the air had been sucked from the world. Rachel froze mid-step, her outstretched hand hanging in the dark, her breath caught in her throat. The storm outside seemed to pause too. The rain suspended mid-splash against the porch, the trees frozen in their violent dance. For one heartbeat, the universe held still, and then slowly Rachel heard it. A low hum, vibrating deep in the bones of the house, resonating in the floorboards beneath her feet. She couldn't see what stood on the other side of the door. The stormlight framed Mark's silhouette, his body rigid in the doorway, but beyond him there was only a shape, a darkness so dense it seemed to swallow the lightning itself. It leaned forward and Rachel swore she could feel its presence inside her chest, coiling around her lungs. Emily screamed her father's name, but her voice was muffled, swallowed by that hum as though the figure absorbed sound itself. Rachel tried to move, to pull Mark back, but her legs wouldn't obey. She felt as if she were standing waist-deep in tar, every muscle resisting. Mark lifted his head, and for the first time Rachel saw his face clearly illuminated by a flash of lightning. It wasn't fear in his eyes. It was surrender. He whispered something too soft to catch, and then he stepped forward into the night. The door swung wider as he disappeared, swallowed by the storm. For a moment Rachel thought she saw fingers. Those impossibly long, skeletal fingers curl around the edge of the door, pulling it open from the outside. But when she blinked, they were gone. The hum deepened, vibrating harder, making the walls groan as though the house itself were protesting. Emily bolted to the door, grabbing the frame with both hands, but Rachel screamed at her not to cross the threshold. Emily froze, torn between grief and terror, her knuckles white against the wood. Then suddenly the door slammed shut. The house shuddered, the lamps flickered back to life, and the storm outside resumed with a vengeance. Rain battered the roof, wind howled, thunder rolled, but Mark was gone. The knob rattled once sharply as though something tested it from the outside. Then silence, absolute suffocating silence. Rachel collapsed to her knees, Jake still clinging to her, sobbing uncontrollably. Emily sank against the wall, tears streaming down her face, whispering, "He's not coming back, is he?" Rachel couldn't answer. She stared at the door, her body trembling, her mind numb, knowing with a hollow certainty that the house had claimed him. The hours that followed blurred into one endless stretch of dread. Rachel sat on the living room floor, her back pressed against the wall. Jake curled tightly against her, whimpering until exhaustion dragged him into a restless sleep. Emily refused to sit. She paced the room like a caged animal, her arms folded tightly across her chest, her eyes fixed on the door as though daring it to move again. The storm raged outside, rattling the windows and bending the trees, but none of it mattered anymore. Mark was gone. Every crack of thunder reminded Rachel of his voice, swallowed by that impossible darkness, and each flash of lightning made her stomach twist with the fear that she'd see him standing outside, changed, waiting to be let back in. Hours crawled by. The clock ticked past 4, then 5, its steady rhythm mocking them, until the first faint glow of dawn crept into the sky. The storm began to break, the rain slowing to a drizzle, the thunder rolling off into the distance. For a moment, Rachel almost let herself believe it was over. Maybe Mark had simply walked out. Maybe he would come back. Maybe it had all been some horrific dream. But then she heard it. 3 sharp knocks on the door. Not the bell this time, knocks, hollow, deliberate, patient. Emily stopped pacing. Jake stirred, opening his bleary eyes. Rachel's breath caught. "Dad?" Emily whispered, stepping toward the door. Rachel's heart seized. "No," she hissed, grabbing Emily's arm. But Emily yanked free, her face twisted in anguish. What if it's him? What if he's alive? The knocks came again, louder this time, echoing through the house. Jake began to cry, clutching Rachel's shirt. "Mom, please make it stop." Rachel felt tears burning in her eyes. Every instinct screamed at her to keep the door shut. But the sound of her daughter's breaking voice was just as unbearable as the thought of her husband lost forever in the storm. The knocks ceased. Silence stretched. Then came the whisper. It slithered through the keyhole, coiling into the room, so soft it was almost lost beneath the ticking of the clock. "Rachel." Her blood turned to ice. It was Mark's voice. She clamped her hands over Jake's ears, but Emily had already heard it. She lunged for the door. Rachel caught her this time, holding her back with every ounce of strength she had. Emily screamed, clawing at her mother's arms, tears streaking her face. "It's him." "He's right there." But Rachel knew. Deep down she knew. Whatever stood on the other side might sound like Mark, but it wasn't him anymore.